Welcome back to Focus Today. What an honor to have with us today Carl Schramm. He's a best-selling author, economist, entrepreneur, and he blogs for the George W. Bush Institute. Perhaps you've seen his columns, The Messy Capitalism, appears in Forbes. He's also writes and publishes for the Wall Street Journal, Foreign Affairs, City Journal, Harvard Business Review, and perhaps you've caught him on some of the other networks like PBS, CNBC, and Fox Business. You may want to check out his book called Better Capitalism. But today he's made it to the big time. He's on the Dove TV network. Hi, Carl. Good to see you. Thanks for your time.
Oh, my pleasure. Good to be with you.
Boy, a lot to talk to you about. First of all, what do you think of the election results?
Well, I think they came as a surprise to everyone. Like these things always happen after the fact. Everyone says, "Oh, I guess it was inevitable." But I think they actually are indicative of a groundswell, as I see it, in terms of people understanding that somehow government's out of control. They can't relate to their government, but probably more importantly, their government doesn't come off as relating to them. And I have a hunch this is, and certainly nothing smart on my part, but I think this is starting to move every place. I think the key indicator was Brexit. I was definitely for Brexit. But if we see the elections 2 days ago in France, I think the ones coming up in Italy will be indicative. I think there's a real breaking up of the post-war world order. And people know that it visits them in their little towns and cities across the country. And they're not so sure they're all in on globalization. So I think that's largely what's going on here.
Well, first time in our history, we've had a very successful businessman with no political experience get elected all the way to the top job. So this ought to be interesting. What do you think it means for business in the future?
Well, I think we'll have someone in the White House who's actually sympathetic to business. Now, he's not a businessman in kind of the normal way, and people ought to be alert to that. He's a developer, and developers are a different breed altogether. Yes, they're capitalists. Yes, they're very entrepreneurial. But there's not a developer walking the face of the earth who isn't very skilled at manipulating government regulations, building codes, and more importantly, local tax arrangements, TIFs, and so forth that stimulate construction principally in downtowns. So, much of what Trump has is in major cities. That means in most cases there's been all kinds of government tax concessions, and in many, many cases there have been outright payments by government to subsidize the cost of construction. Some
have said, Carl, that the answer to the economic ills of our country is simple: jobs. All kinds of jobs, inner city jobs, everything. And he certainly campaigned hard on that. Yes. Does his entrepreneurial experience, his capitalistic understanding, how does that translate literally into the labor force to create jobs?
Well, I'm not so sure that President-elect Trump is actually a economist construct about how all this happens. He said a few code words that, if they are filled out with real policy, will actually work. One code word is he's not so much sure that globalization has done the United States any good. That's all his chatter about trade deals, re-examining trade deals. He's 100% right there in the sense that, they have not been good for American workers. On the other hand, you have this competing sense that our economy has flourished in large part because of free trade. The real issue is we're not growing fast enough to create enough jobs. We've been steady at less than or at 2% GDP for the whole last 8 years. And the good news about Trump, you cannot beat this. This is the gold on which you'd want to invest. Is he's my age. We have lived through periods of enormous expansion in our economy. So he's lived through 5% years. He's lived through many, many 4% years where the economy was growing at twice the rate it has been growing over the last 8 years. And this is fundamental. He understands what it feels like to be in a booming economy. Play this back differently. I'm a college professor. There's nobody in my classrooms, in my seniors, so they're 22. Those kids have never, ever lived in a booming American economy when they were of age to understand what was going on. And, I visit this on my students all the time saying, at 4%, no one lives in their parents' basement. And at 4%, instead of hoping you get one job, okay, in the gig economy, maybe the brighter students get a couple job offers. But every college graduate used to get multiple, 3, 4, 5, 6 job offers. So that's just not the case anymore. So that will be a hugely different situation if we can get growth. Now, the long-term issue is, will we get manufacturing jobs like we once did? Because even all the jobs we shipped overseas are being done by fewer workers. Productivity is constantly replacing machines with workers with machines, and that continues to go on. On the other hand, I think if we brought more and more industry back to the United States, and manufacturing industry, and had incentives here for more manufacturing, we'd see a lot more of it.
The announcement with Ford and Apple sticking around,
yeah.
Is that an indicator?
Yes, I think it's an absolute indicator. It may be symbolic at the edges, but a lot of economics is symbolic when it comes to the policy level. That is to say, economists have this marvelous phrase for explaining things, and that is self-fulfilling prophecies. So if you say more companies are going to stay and do business in the United States, it turns out more often than not, more companies will stay and do business in the United States. So these symbolic steps are important in policymaking.
Cutting the corporate tax to 15%, how long will it take for us to realize that benefit?
No more than 18 months. In fact, I think if the Congress were to meet, let's say, in the third week of January, pass that, and it's not complex legislation, and the president signed it, we'd see the effect of that within 12 months.
Wow. Back to your students just for a moment, because you said something kind of interesting. Do they have hopes for a booming economy, or are they pessimistic?
Well, there's a complex answer. Not really. It's a pretty simple answer, but there's a complex strain to this answer. First, again, as I said before, they've never seen a booming economy, so they don't know what it looks like. So you can't hope for something that you haven't seen, right, in many regards when it comes to economics. Second, they're not so sure they like growth. And this is really, really an insidious and very, very difficult thing to think about, certainly for people like me. But it's insidious, and it's really bad for democracy, and it's bad mostly for poor people, and it's really bad for general economic welfare. And that is, most students have been educated, if not propagandized, to be against growth. So powerful is the meme that we can't have business, and we can't have industry, and we can't drive cars, right? And we can't have big houses, and we can't have air conditioning because it's despoiling to the environment. That growth must be bad. There's a professor at Syracuse who said to me the other day, he said, Obama's had a really, really successful presidency. And I said, how is that? He said, well, he's basically destroyed American leadership in the world, which, whether you like it or not, kept the peace. Second, he's achieved an absolute slow growth economy. And in this professor's view, that's great because he has erected environmental protection on top of economic growth. It's a superordinate value. And then third, he's grown the administrative state enormously with the passage of Obamacare. And that was this guy's perspective. But the reason I visited on that is the second, and that was in the interest of protecting the environment, he's basically slowed growth in the economy. Now, whether that's the president's motive or not, I have no idea. But from much of where the president comes ideologically, growth is the enemy of environmental protection.
That is a fascinating answer. I learned so much just listening to that answer. That also probably explains the disdain, or at least the propaganda eyes of the disdain for corporate America until they go look for a job.
Yeah. Well, it helps. One of the things I worry about that goes on in corporate America is corporate America. There are a lot of people in corporate American leadership who like to be kind of, I can only describe this as hip. So they want these students who really don't want to work all that much often to feel comfortable and at home, and they want their companies to be hip. So we see a lot of corporate American leadership doing what I think are very dumb things. That is to say, you know, they overspend on environmental issues that they know return nothing to shareholders, and they hold no particular value for the company itself. There's lots of corporate social responsibility activity that is just make people feel good activity. In the area in which I operate, namely entrepreneurship studies, there's an enormous amount of spending on entrepreneurship that actually has negative implications for the companies and produces fewer entrepreneurs, but it's fashionable, so they do it. And I think in many ways, and this is evident also, obviously, in graduate schools of business. There are many programs in graduate schools of business for, quote, social entrepreneurship. Well, social entrepreneurship is nonprofit entrepreneurship. It's an implicit critique of capitalism. But we have professors in business schools that, spend a lot of time servicing students, teaching students who want to be in business, but they don't want to make money.
Wow. All right, let me take a quick break here. Carl Schramm is with us today. Professor Schramm, you can go to carlschramm.com. That's his website, and that's C-H-R-A-M-M. Let me take a quick break. I'm fascinated by this. His book is entitled Better Capitalism. Check it out. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.
I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.
Welcome back to Focus Today. What an honor to have with us Professor Dr. Carl Schramm. He's a best-selling author, economist, entrepreneur, blogs for the George W. Bush Institute. You see him all over the place, his columns. His latest book is entitled Better Capitalism. You may want to check that out at the bookstores. His website is Carl Schramm, and that's SCHRAMM.com. Gee, Professor, I want to sign up for one of your classes, but let me ask you this. What happened at Syracuse during the Global Entrepreneurship Week? How'd that go over?
It went well. Syracuse has got a huge commitment to entrepreneurship all over the university. And the Blackstone Foundation had just given the university some money to get a new center going, which I like. The center, it's not for kids who've actually studied entrepreneurship. It's more for kids who really want to start businesses. And that's sort of the block on which I stand. I'm not a great fan of classroom teaching of entrepreneurship. But anyway, it went very well. And what you're asking about, I suspect, is I gave the kickoff address there. 8 years ago, Gordon Brown, who was then Prime Minister of England, and I kicked off this idea that around the world, youngsters, principally in high school, should get a sense of what it was like to own a business or start a business or work in a business. And Brown, who was actually essentially a socialist prime minister, was of the view that English kids didn't even know what factories looked like. So he established this program where every kid who was the equivalent of a high school senior would spend a week in a factory in England just so they understood what business did, where their Wheaties came from, or how televisions were made or refrigerators were put together. So I joined up with him when I was running the Kauffman Foundation, and we instituted it 8 years ago, and it's just finished last week, but it was celebrated in 165 countries.
Wow!
So
congratulations!
I think it's an example of what I like to call private diplomacy, where the United States took a great idea, or private citizens in the United States, a foundation in the United States, took a great idea and went abroad with it.
Wow, congratulations. Let me ask you this, Professor. Is your brand of entrepreneurialism causing some kind of an academic crisis?
No, but it will when my next book is out, which is going to be called Burn the Business Plan. And it will cause I'm not sure you can cause crises in universities. People lock on to what they think is truth. We see it all over the place. And they teach it regardless of what the facts seem to be. So there are lots of really profoundly important books, like Thomas Kuhn's book on the nature of scientific revolutions, that talks about, and a much more popular book that many of your readers may have seen is Malcolm Gladwell's book on tipping point. Things aren't as they look like, and then one moment all of the evidence starts to congeal in a certain way, and then bang, people do things differently. So my next book is headed in that direction, basically saying, look, the more professors of entrepreneurship we have, the more incubators we start, the more venture funds that are available locally, we produce many fewer entrepreneurs. And I just had a piece in the Wall Street Journal that basically said we have an entrepreneurship crisis on our hands in the United States. Compared to 8 years ago, we have 30% plus, more than 30% fewer businesses being formed every year. Now, in those last 8 years, we've produced almost 4,000 new professors of entrepreneurship. So, if you deployed 4,000 people to do something, and the thing they were trying to do, you were getting a lot less of, you'd have to scratch your head and say, hey, what's going on here? Are people teaching the right thing? So eventually, we're going to talk probably next year about this time about a different way to teach this.
That's fascinating. Somebody said business is spelled R-I-S-K. Would you believe it?
Yes, that's right. But, we grow up in a society where college students and lots of other people don't want anything to do with R-I-S-K. And the government's theory, probably since the Great Society forward, says we will protect you from RISK. That's government's job. No one should have risk. Well, the more you de-risk a society, the less ambitious people will become and the less risk-taking they will have experience with. We gather experience. All of us know about risk. And one of the implicit types of knowledge we develop as we go through life is how to judge risk against our own taste and then how to manage risk. But if you have a riskless society, a society with less risk in it, who cares? One of the issues we're having right now is, there was a great celebration about 162,000 new jobs being created last month in October. But what the press didn't tell you was that the number of people who became discouraged workers, people who left the labor force entirely in October, was larger than the number of new jobs that were created. So what happened to them? Well, many of them went on social welfare programs. And one of the difficulties we have at this point is we have so many discouraged workers who've essentially been out of the labor market, withdrawn themselves, and are on, public subsidies and so forth, that they don't want to take the risk of losing that and going back into the labor market. So a lot of times we're going to have to adjust wages, threshold or entry wages, higher and higher, just to induce people to come back into the labor market. And that is counterproductive. As you know, the debate over the minimum wage is such that, I think if Hillary Clinton had been elected, she would be campaigning for a $15 or $17 federal minimum wage. Well, an entrepreneur who's starting a restaurant cannot pay $15 or $17 an hour for people who wash dishes. It just can't be done and keep the restaurant alive. So, these are the conflicting forces in a society, and lots of them can be seen, as your question suggests, through the lens of risk.
Yeah. I got about 4 minutes left. Let me ask you this, is a big question. The movement that got Trump elected,
yes.
a lot of that was people realizing the answer really maybe not be welfare. It really is a job. Is it a movement with a short life, or do you think this has got some momentum behind it to go back and get government back under control?
Oh, I think there's huge momentum. And I'll tell you, I think there may be more momentum than President-elect Trump actually understands. That is to say, look at all the flapdoodle that's going on over whether or not he would appoint John Kerry as Secretary of State. The people who elected Donald Trump want Washington to be totally different. I'm not John Kerry, I mean Mitt Romney, right? And I don't think they see Mitt Romney as anything other than essentially the establishment. So if we don't see growth, if we don't see job growth, if we don't see a renegotiation of these treaties, if we don't see a reset of our notion about globalism, if we don't see a reset around the question of immigration, I think Trump will lose his base pretty quickly. I don't think that opens the door to the Democrats to be popular overnight. But I think what it suggests is there's more going on here. And I referenced at the beginning of our interview, the changes going on inside Europe that begin to look like elections very much like ours. Brexit, the French elections, the Austrian elections, the upcoming Italian elections, where conservative forces will be much more powerful on the other side of these elections. There's a breakup of the old order. And the big question is whether or not Donald Trump understands it in those terms, as opposed to just the terms that could get people elected because they hated Washington.
Wow, fascinating. Yeah, there's something big happening around the world. One quick question last. Do your students see the threat of our national debt?
No.
Okay.
That's a quick question. I gave you a quicker answer. No, they don't see that. I mean, they've been lulled along for 8 years with a view that they don't, A, know the debt's important, B, they have enormous trust in Obama as the super intellect who knows how to do all things. They sit there disappointed in many regards that nobody's talking about giving them free education anymore, right? They wanted in on the welfare, and they wanted in on low-risk life, and they wanted in on free benefits like, free college. They don't understand one of the reasons that college is so extraordinarily expensive. It is so highly regulated from the federal government. And this is one of those points, if Donald Trump puts somebody in as Secretary of Education who doesn't shake the blanket heavily under universities and colleges and gets rid of a huge amount of, the regulation that costs so much in the students' tuition, they don't see that connection. There'll be more perturbations to come. That's the best way to say it.
Well, Professor, you're a delight. Thank you for your time. We value it greatly, and the best to you. When's your next book coming out?
It should be out probably September, October. It's called Burn the Business Plan.
Okay, and then the one you got going now is called Better Capitalism. You might want to check that out at the bookstores.
Yep, that's out from Yale. Mm-hmm.
There's a picture of it there on the screen, and his website is Carl Schramm, SCHRAMM.com. Thank you, Professor. What a delight. Let's connect again soon, okay?
I'd look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And again, you can see his writings, and it appears in Forbes, Wall Street Journal, Foreign Affairs, City Journal, Harvard Business Review, and sometimes you'll catch him on PBS, CNBC, Fox Business. And again, if you want to check out this interview again, we'll have it up on the Dove website a little bit later on this afternoon. You can watch it again and share it with your friends. But send him a note at Carl Schramm, SCHRAMM.com, and check Better Capitalism. We'll see you next time on Focus Today.